Hello, I'm Lindsay Johnson, Fiscal Sponsorship and Communications Manager at Southeast Uplift. Thank you for joining us today. This is our third session in the 7-part House of Development webinar series presented by and in partnership with COGEO. This session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. You are welcome to have your camera on or off, whatever is most comfortable for you. We have enabled captions. If you have additional access needs, feel free to post those in the chat. We do ask that you remain muted during the presentation and save questions for the end. We have reserved time for a brief Q&A. Our fourth session will be on Tuesday, July 11th from 4 to 5 p.m. And that will be focused on foundation outreach and grant writing and corporate giving. Now I'm going to hand over the mic to our presenter, Chelsi, to introduce herself.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Lindsay. So as Lindsay mentioned, I'm Chelsi and I'm Director of Client Services at COGEO. And we're a consulting agency dedicated to the 501c3 sector. And we really specialize in providing advice and direct support services to really help accelerate the development and fundraising growth of nonprofit organizations. So our focus primarily lies within the small to medium-sized nonprofit space. And we've really found that's where we can have our greatest impact and really impact the organizations we support. And so our goal is really to catalyze organizations who have these grand missions and visions, but just need a little bit of a boost to get there. And we have clients spanning across the United States and collectively have over 40 years of fundraising experience. Throughout our journey, we have successfully raised millions of dollars for over 100 organizations spanning various sectors. All right. So now that you know a little bit more about us and what we do, our work, let's dive into the presentation. All right. Okay, so today's webinar, again, we're in the third session of our 7-part House of Development series. And this is a little roadmap slide of where we're at, where we're headed, and where we've been. For that, I will dive into fundraising events. So this is the House of Development, which you'll recognize if you joined or listened to our past webinars. But as a reminder, the House of Development is a tool created by COGEO to really conceptualize the successful building blocks of 501c3s and explain why development is so crucial in achieving fundraising goals. And it's really intended to be looked at from the bottom up. So really briefly here, the walkway and garden here, you'll see communications. So this is things like PR, websites, social media, e-newsletters, annual reports. And then you'll enter the house. This first level is where we're at, fundraising events, as well as annual and membership giving. So you can really think of this first floor as retail. It's really funds that go straight to general operations, which is ideal, unrestricted. And last session, we discussed annual giving. So today we're going to be talking about events. So what are our goals for today? First, we'll talk about how to be an effective Mason bricklayer. So how to build an effective house of development. You really need to know how best practices ensure your organization's future sustainability. We'll also talk about why events can really be a cornerstone of your fundraising work. And we'll also discuss a bit about how clean and organized data and systems really fuel the rest of the smart home, which is our term essentially for the House of Development plus different types of technology. So data management, emailing, all that stuff to really help amp up your fundraising. Right. So now to really get into it, our next slide, what are different types of events? And here's a list of the ones that we've seen most commonly in our work. And those are galas and signature events, which we'll discuss in a little bit what actually constitutes a signature event. Breakfasts and breakfast calls to action. So fun runs, walks, that includes things like thons as well as fest events, which we'll talk about a couple examples a little later in this presentation. golf tournaments and other types of tournaments, cultivation events, open houses, campaign launch events, and campaign completion events. So those are really celebrations kicking off or kind of rounding out a campaign. So why are events important? Well, there's multiple reasons. First and most obvious, it builds public awareness of your organization and its mission. Events are really helpful too in attracting new members and board members, so really cultivating that, as well as attracting new and incremental donors and gathering data intelligence around those donors. So as I've mentioned before in past presentations, you can build on data to really gain intelligence on your donors and progress them into the other levels of the House of Development. So events can really be the intro to really gaining a lifelong potential donor. Events are also a great way to cultivate current, new, and prior donors. Also allows participation of new and incremental volunteers. So it's an opportunity to engage new and incremental people and increase your networking, make new connections, which is great. Events help you also meet budgetary needs by raising incremental funds. It's also an opportunity to prevent newer if you feel that need to. It provides also an opportunity for internal community building. So it helps your organization really thrive when you pull off an event successfully, really builds that solidarity within your group, as well as external community building and partnerships. So it's an opportunity to engage your community, bring in new people again, bring in potential partnerships with individuals and companies. So all around really great source of connections. Events are also an opportunity to advance marketing and PR initiatives. And PR stands for public relations. Events also give you an opportunity to honor, thank, and recognize key individuals who may have made an impact on your organization or agency. And finally, they're social, just pure fun. They can be a lot of fun when you do it successfully, engage the community, engage your organization, volunteers. All right. So those were some reasons why events are important, how much fun they can be too when they're pulled off successfully, but they can also be challenging, as I'm sure many of you are aware. So here's, again, another list of the most common roadblocks. You really need to understand what the event calendar is in your community or city to make sure that you're not necessarily competing with something that might prevent attendees from showing up. Would be attending something else, and that can really cut into who's going to show up. Resources, getting resources can also be challenging. Same thing with leadership, can just be hard finding the right leadership to host the event and really coordinate it. Volunteer training and management. So you need to really be sure to properly train volunteers and ensure quality events, which can also take, again, resources and you'll need to make sure that you have internal organizational capacity to put some time into that training and management. Solicitations. So again, soliciting donations in kind or monetary, that can be another challenge. Finding who to solicit, determining the messaging, how the ask is going to be made, who's going to make the ask. That's all going to take work and time and some forethought. Invitations and guests. You want to be making sure that invitees and guests you want to have there are properly approached. You're approaching the right people at the right time in the right way. The budget as well, you need to make sure that you plan for that within your budget year to year, the events, how much it costs, and we'll dive into it in a little more detail here, but tied in with that, how much it costs and how much it's returning as well. Record keeping and databases, it's really critical to maintain a record year to year of the event, how it was held, how much it raised, a lot of different details. And this is going to be something that you need people power, again, to do this and make sure that you're managing the data year to year. Decision-making structure. So is the planning structure, is it vertical or horizontal? You have subcommittees. You need to be thinking about that as well. How many people are involved in the planning and how often are they meeting? All of that to really make sure that you are planning and hosting it to the best effect. Communication, you have to think about what is the communication flow for the event over the course of preparing and executing the event. Donor volunteer recognition. You want to think, is it satisfying enough? Want to make sure that you're recognizing your volunteers and donors in the optimal way. Strategic planning and goal setting. Is there enough planning and goal setting, essentially, in terms of ROI in particular? So that's return on investment. You want to make sure that your event is not costing more than it is bringing in. And finally, sustainability. Is it an event that you can really do year to year, year over year at the same time? So it really becomes something that the community looks forward to. And in a little bit, I'll talk about some case studies to go over some of these challenges and how they pulled it off and how they've really become signature events for a lot of organizations. All right. So really, here's the essential question that you want to be asking yourself. Are events worth your time, or are you having too many events that aren't producing the proper ROI? In other words, are they too resource heavy? So here's some context to really understand fundraising activities and their expenditures. This is data pulled from the Association of Fundraising Professionals. So for instance, capital campaigns cost about 5 to 10 cents per dollar raised. Grant writing and corporation outreach cost about 20 cents per dollar raised. Direct mail is $1.25 to $1.50 per dollar. Direct mail renewal, 25 cents on the dollar. Planned giving is also 25 cents on the dollar. And here we come to events, which is 50 cents on the dollar. So this is all really interesting data, and something that you'll see is events aren't the most expensive, but they're also not the cheapest either. So it's something that you really want to be thinking about moving forward, determining the timing of your events, how many you're hosting, and balancing that with other fundraising opportunities that might yield greater results with less money and less time. So this is not to say also that you should cut events out entirely. It's just something to think about when you're planning events. I think sometimes we get into a trap of thinking about events as kind of the end all of fundraising, but it's really just a portion of it. All right. So on this slide, we provide an outline of industry trends that you'll see. Nonprofits here are labeled in the blue. So those are under 5 million in revenue, and represented in orange are medium-sized agencies, which is 5 to 50 million in revenue, and the larger ones are 50 million and above. Those are in green. So on the x-axis, you can really see essentially it's the ROI, and y-axis is the ease of planning. So essentially, this is really a supply and demand line. And you'll see there's a correlation between how hard it is to plan and how much is being raised. And you'll see the types of events and proceeds, X and Y axis, don't really vary dramatically across industries, different agency sizes. And on the right here, you'll see this data point, 82% or essentially 3/4 of agencies do some kind of event and host some kind of event. So again, this is all to say events can be a great way to bring in funds, bring in donors, really engage the community, but it's not something that you want to be relying on solely for fundraising. And another element that you'll want to keep in mind when planning events is to really recognize the sector-specific events are more important than others, depending on the agency's mission and activities. So I'll really discuss this a little bit in more detail later on. But wanted to underscore that point, just the importance of aligning the event with your mission. You don't want to host an event that is kind of seemingly random, not aligned with your mission, doesn't really make sense for what you do. You want to think through your events and make sure that it's coming across, and always think about what the work you're doing and how it connects. All right. So now on for some, let's talk about some best practices. So there's really 3 macro areas that we want to examine, and we'll look at a few case studies to highlight these different elements in a little more detail in real time. But first, let's talk about some of the basics. So for you'll see first, there's the preparation stage, the execution stage, and the evaluation stage. So for the preparation phase, a few elements here. You'll want a strong and organized leadership team. So you really want a dynamic team who together will really make a difference in the culture of the event, how it's presented, executed, evaluated, and stewarded. So there are essentially 2 types of volunteers. The ideal types are the true altruists. So these are people who are volunteering for the benefit of the agency or the organization, rather than the dangerous types, the folks who are there for ego replenification. So they're doing it because they want some benefit for themselves. And, folks like that, usually see them in independent day schools, I will say. For the most part, I think volunteers are amazing. They're usually in it for the right reasons, but it is something to be aware of when you're bringing on volunteers. You want folks who are the altruists, who will really just dive in and support the agency. So yeah, big piece of this, make sure you're vetting your volunteers. We also recommend having at least 1 staff member on board to manage the data, make sure everything's being tracked, since usually you don't want to give a volunteer access to your database to really track a lot of that information. Another element of the preparation phase is committed donors and sponsors. So hopefully these will be individuals and companies who will be developed further on an annual basis. And we'll speak a little bit more specifically about how this works and what it means coming up here and also in future presentations. You also, again, want committed volunteers. Again, you want them to be altruistic. You want to raise a lot of money for the agency hosting the events rather than kind of sometimes getting in the way as that other bucket does. They hinder usually event planning rather than help. And again, data management here, that's going to be a theme running throughout this webinar session as well as others. And I've mentioned it too in past webinar sessions, data management is critical. You really want to make sure that you have detailed identification of who will be managing your data in order to really be successful on a year-to-year basis. And it's also really important for stewarding the event. After the event, you want to make sure you're stewarding all your donors and sponsors and volunteers. All right. So next phase here. Next phase here is event execution. So first element, detailed schedule and scripts. So you don't want any nebulism in the execution phase at all. It really needs to be outlined minute to minute, what's going to happen, who's going to ensure each element or activity is occurring for the event. If you have a silent auction, you want to make sure you know what the flow is. If you're showing a movie, you want to know when it's occurring, who's going to be in charge of getting it started and getting people kind of in their seats. You'll want to make sure all the volunteers know what they're doing. They have their posts and positions. And in terms of planning, there should really be a reverse timeline that goes out, X number of months. For some events, it could even be a full year. Some events, it only needs a couple months. Really depends on the type of event you're hosting. And what you'll want to do is just reverse engineer the timing and the planning needed to make sure you're hosting it at the right time and you give yourself enough time to plan. Another element for the execution phase is donor and volunteer recognition. So for instance, if your agency is not currently handing out an agency-based award, you really should consider it. It's a great way to motivate people and make them feel valued and seen. And what this does, especially in a major gift setting, your major donor or connector will be there. They'll be in attendance to receive the award, and often they'll invite their friends and family, which can in turn expand your network. And I'll talk a little bit of a specific example of that in a few slides here, but just a little heads up on what's ahead. Right. And on to our last phase, which is the evaluation phase. So this stage is what will really distinguish you from other agencies in your area who are also hosting events. Elements of this include donor stewardship. This is really critical. So for example, we instruct our clients that the minute they secure a commitment from a sponsor or donor, they just pick up the phone, call the donor or sponsor to thank them, or shoot them an email, shoot them a text, really depends on, again, on the, I've mentioned this in previous sessions, but you'll want to make sure that you're communicating with the donor in the method and the venue that they prefer. So stewardship, you want to be aggressive. It can really make a difference on how you're perceived by donors, whether they're in kind or monetary or both. That really sets you apart. Volunteer stewardship also, don't assume they had a great time at the event. You really want to make sure that you steward them also and poll them. That will help you evaluate the event and help them do that in a really organized way. So volunteers can be a wealth of information, how the event went and how you can do better next time, and a lot of those great details. Distribution also of event evaluations. So you want to be really overt in terms of understanding the evaluation and what needs to be improved for the next event. And the big one here is cultivation of event data. So I wanted to underscore this one. Again, all the data really needs to be collected and saved in your CRM, which is a client or customer relationship management system. So whatever system you're using, if it's Salesforce or Razor's Edge, Bloomerang, or just plain old spreadsheets, just make sure you're collecting event data to make sure you know what occurred, what you can do better. You'll have something to evaluate post-event. And creation of event reports. So once the data is collected, you want to create some event reports to really understand what occurred, what was raised, what changed from year to year, where were the best areas of ROI. So this is something that you'll want to be constantly evaluating. All right. So with that understanding and context, let's look at some case studies from some of our COGEO's past and current clients in which we are involved in the planning process for each of these events. So our first case study here is HealthRight 360's annual breakfast. So HealthRight 360 is an organization based in California. They're a family of other 501c3s and programs, and what they do is they take people who were previously incarcerated and they bring them into society in LA, in the Bay Area, and San Diego to help them with re-entry. So they provide various services to support them in that process. So these are adults, again, previously incarcerated, so it can be a hard sell in the development arena, but this organization has really done a great job in branding itself and gaining a really strong supportive foundation. So for instance, they've raised about $15 million for a new location in San Francisco, which was a massive success for them. It really allowed them to consolidate all their operations into I believe it was about a 30,000 square foot facility, which was huge. So this breakfast event that they host each year, this is a great event, works really well for social service agencies in particular. So it consists of, it's 1 hour. It's a little bit more serious because of the mission, and it starts at 8 a.m. They're done by 9 a.m. So it's really a nice minimal time commitment for donors, volunteers, staff. And they usually do it at a fancy hotel like the Ritz-Carlton. So what they do, they have one person in the organization who spends about 5% of her time managing the event. And then it's a matter of acquiring what they call table captains. So they try to get about 26 per year. And then each table captain is responsible for bringing about 7 people to their table. So about 800 or 182, 200 people total. And the structure, again, it's 1 hour. The table captains welcome their guests, and then the chairman of the board stands up, welcomes everyone, and introduces an MC. And usually that's someone who's high profile, for instance, Dan Ashley, who's a host on ABC 7 News. And then they also introduce the executive director. at which point the executive director will stand up also, give a short State of the Union address, talk about the agency, what they're doing. And then they all sit down, they show a movie. And the movie is clients talking about how their lives were saved. So it's really impactful, speaks, of course, again, directly to their mission, the work they're doing, really clear alignment. And then once the movie is completed, the clients who were highlighted in the film are in attendance. They stand up and give a speech, each of them individually. And they were trained extensively the night before. So the speech is really tailored and perfected to a T, which is really important. So again, really impactful. Our director of consulting, has been in attendance multiple times, and he's spoken how emotional it can really be, and really inspire people to give and support. So once the clients sit down after their speeches, another MC will come up, make an ask, and then the table captains will then hand out pledge forms to their tables. Pledges are made, and that really wraps up the event. And all in all, it's 1 hour, but Health Right raises about $300,000 every year. So very simple format, straightforward, but again, huge ROI, which is exactly the type of events we advocate for. And the event evaluation here is a big deal. They have a really great track record of converting event donors with the capacity to major and campaign donors through really effective stewardship. All right, so let's dive into another case study. This one is with Empower Me Academy. This is a current client I've mentioned before. Empower Me Academy is a youth basketball organization in San Francisco, dedicated to developing student leaders through sports, specifically basketball. So they provide basketball training and mentorship programs that really focus on athletic excellence, but also holistically develop the youth in their programs. So they're developing a whole individual, not just an athlete. So this event is EmpowerFest, which was formerly BasketballFun. It's been rebranded this year. First year was their first annual. It was in 2021. Last year, 2022 was their second, and this year is going to be their third. So in 2021, for instance, they raised over $16,000, which was great for a first event. 2022, they raised about $27,000, which is awesome to see. Kind of ideal when you're doing events. Hopefully, you'll see, an incremental increase over time as you continue to refine the events, get more attendees, more donors interested in it. So EMA has been great in proactively reaching out to corporate sponsors. For instance, a big one this year was stewarded through a relationship with Empower Me Academy's executive director and a tech company in the area, which has resulted in a $20,000 lead sponsorship for this year's events. And in their first year, they also, as I mentioned, held a Community Impact Award presentation. So that first year, they presented to one of their largest donors. His son was in the program, one of the early students actually in the program. His son's neurodivergent, and EMA really impacted him. He's now attending school, learning how to be an actor. He also went on to become a member of EMA's board. So huge impact on his life and impact on the family. So this event, first event, they held that Community Impact Award for this donor. The donor flew in from, he was vacationing, I think, in Barbados. He flew in just for the event. He was really excited to receive the award and felt really recognized. And he invited also some of his close friends who were also pretty high profile. So highlights specifically how important those Community Impact Awards can be in recognizing donors and increasing networking capacity of the organization. So structure of the events. First year is 1 day. They changed it to 2 days based on feedback from their community. So it's really 2 days of a lot of fun. It's, again, been rebranded as a festival because it's expanded a little bit beyond just a pure a thon format. So it does still have those thon elements. It's a 3v3 basketball competition, and they have some side events, skill contest, shooting contest. And then about 1 p.m., they present the Community Service or Impact Award. And then last year also, they had ABC7 in attendance who did a special news highlight of them, which I linked in our presentation here. So you'll have access to this presentation. I've included some various links that you can click and follow, so feel free to interact with it following this presentation. And follow-ups for the event, EMA did a recap of the event, sent that out to everyone, attendees and non-attendees included. So that really helped increase awareness and excitement. They included visuals, photos of the event, a short clip of highlights of the event. They also sent that along with a link to a Google form survey to obtain feedback. Again, first year, that survey helped them learn that people wanted a multi-day event, which they took into consideration. And year 2 and 3 are 2-day events. And yeah, that's been essentially our process. Again, really, so far it has been really effective. This third year, again, is going to be this year is going to be their 3rd year. So looking forward to seeing how it changes and adapts from here. All right. So on to another case study. This is Star Chefs and Vintners Gala with Meals on Meals. So this is another past client. It's an organization that delivers nutritious meals to elderly and homebound individuals who may not or may have difficulty preparing or accessing food. They also provide support and social interaction, so various other supportive services to help improve the well-being and independence of those they serve. And I want to flag this as what we would call specifically a signature event, just based on the time invested, how it's mission-centric, and the way it's become really entrenched within their community, their larger community. All that kind of points to signature event, which I'll talk a little bit once I cover some of the basics of the event. So this is a 2-hour event that they've been doing for about 14 years now. It's really an event food's prepared by really high quality chefs in the area, and they provide some of the greatest wine with their meals. And over the course of these 14 years, they've really established it as one of the main events in the Bay Area. So again, really mission-centric, the food focus aligns with their mission. The event also includes a silent auction, raffle, and a live auction. So the silent auction, a lot of donors like it, mostly food and wine items. Live auction is massive, with items reflecting, the interest of donors, mainly travel items. The raffle is a big one as well. So Meals on Wheels has a relationship with BMW, which provides an actual vehicle every year for the raffle, which they sell limited number of tickets for at a pretty high cost. They also have a full-time employee just because of the magnitude and scale of the event. And the fact that the event itself nets about $2 million in 2 hours. So this is, they've really become, this event has really made them really step up and continue to progress. So this is what you can become, but definitely not something that you necessarily have to or expect to, but what can be done with events, which is amazing. So how do they do all this, and how has this event become such a signature event? So first, they have really strong leadership. The executive director is great at managing it along with a full-time employee. They have about a decade, too, of building the donor base through fundraising and development work. So this really takes time. It didn't happen overnight. So I will say, again, don't get discouraged if you don't see immediate results for your own events, especially when you're first starting out. It's just part of the cycle and life cycle of development work. So the volunteer base and management is also incredible. They have people returning year to year to support the events. Their data management is also flawless. I believe they use Razor's Edge to track and manage everything. And again, also the execution is flawless. Donor-centric, they have very few speeches. One person is honored, generally a larger donor. And following the event, they spent about 11.5 months, so almost a full year, doing data evaluation. And it's really good. They also do really good donor and volunteer stewardship, and they're really stringent about getting as many evaluations as possible from anyone involved in the event, which includes the donors, the volunteers, the chefs, anyone involved. So what they're really after in this event, through this event, is incremental donors. So it can really attract very wealthy individuals. And the goal is to make money through the event, of course, but more importantly, it's to cultivate donors and prepare them for major gifts. All right. So with that, let's dive into another case study. This one was with another current client, Arlington Soccer Association. This is a youth soccer association in Arlington, Virginia. They were founded in 1970, so about 50 years old. Pretty large organization. They have about 9,000 registered players, 640 teams, 850 coaches, about 1,000 volunteers. And they hosted their first soccer-thon last year under our guidance. And they're currently planning their second event for this year because they were so pleased with the results in their first year. So the first year, they only had about 2 months to prepare. They contracted with us and we started talking about events, and they really wanted to get one hosted before the end of the year. So the timing was tight, but they were really dedicated. They had really strong leadership, staff and volunteers to pull it off. I will say that's not usually advised that short a period, but it was a unique situation. So we went for it and it went great. But I will say, try to give yourself as much time as possible to make sure you're planning it well. You have the time to really pull off a successful event. So the structure, it was a thon, so they had peer-to-peer fundraising element along with a $20 all-day wristband. So kids could participate in any side events as many times as they like. They also had a raffle with donated items. And all in all, they raised about $38,000 and had about 1,200 attendees. So really impressive showing for their first year. They also provided surveys after the event along with a highlight email sent to the entire community. So that is a big one. You want to make sure that you send that out as soon as possible. I'll talk about that in a little bit later on in this presentation, but you'll see that recurring theme of sending a thank you along with a survey of the event to get feedback. All right, and our last case study for now. This is another one of our current clients, Toka FC. This is another soccer organization. They're based in Olathe, Kansas. Founded in 2011, so a little bit of a slightly newer organization, younger, smaller too, still starting out a little bit. They have 934 players, 74 teams, 33 coaches, about 100 volunteers. So they engaged us last year to launch a capital campaign to build out a 35,000 square foot indoor facility. So this was a campaign launch event to announce the campaign. So it was about an hour and a half event. They scheduled it on location, on the location of the indoor facility site, which is the same location where they have practice trainings right now. So they schedule it to fall in between trainings for their younger kids and older kids to really have the maximum number of people present, parents picking up, dropping off. So that was really great timing on their part and good planning, making sure that you have as many people in attendance as possible. So they invited their community members. It was a community-wide event. And for many, it was the first time they were hearing about the news. So it was really great to have that real-time discussion and get those reactions and generate interest. They also did social media posts, which leading up to that, which were essentially a little bit vague. They intentionally kept it a little mysterious to generate interest, which ended up making news actually all over Kansas City. It just said essentially, join us for a special announcement. People were really curious what the announcement would be, really increased the attendance rate. So key staff did speeches, they did a sign reveal, and then they did a Q&A session. And their recap and follow-up included a thank you email with next steps, FAQs, and ways to get involved. The follow-up had about a 68% open rate for the announcement, 3,000 emails click rate, which was really impressive. And they've, moving forward, they've been keeping people updated on their progress. So we'll also do an event for the facility opening when that time comes, which may be in conjunction with their planned soccer-thon or soccer fest. All right. So now let's dive into how technology plays into the elements that we've discussed at really each stage of the fundraising event life cycle. All right. So first up is the preparation stage. So first element here is the event registration. First thing is to make sure you want to set up the event registration. So you can utilize platforms like Eventbrite. You can use your own websites. There's other sites like RallyUp or GiveButter that provide event registration. The key here is that you'll want something that's easy to use and that you can integrate with your other systems. And you'll also want to evaluate your budget as well. Some cost money, some are free, some have a slight fee. You'll want to really think about what you can afford and what your needs are. Email as well. Once you have registration set up, you'll want to begin marketing via email and social media. So for email, you can use sites like HubSpot, which is a software platform that provides really a suite of marketing and sales and customer service tools. It offers a range of integrated features too, like integrating with CRM, email marketing, social media management, different types of analytics. So it really can help streamline your efforts. If you don't need anything that comprehensive at this stage, you can also just use things like platforms like MailChimp, Constant Contact, really any other email platform that you want or prefer. Generally, to decide, you'll just want to make a list of, again, what you need and decide what your budget can handle. Social media scheduling as well. You want to make sure that you're sending out social media updates leading up to the events on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, some of those key sites. And you'll want to create a really nice posting plan. So you want to think about the types of content that you'll be sharing, if they're promotion of speakers, learning points, logistics about the events leading up to it. And then you'll want to make a decision on how often you'll be posting. And a great recommendation is getting it like each of these posts and emails scheduled and queued up in advance, which will save you a ton of time. As I'm sure anyone who's been involved in event planning can tell you, there's always something, there's always at least a few things that you need to handle leading up to the event. So taking that off your plate and getting them scheduled ahead of time is a great rule of thumb. And last up here is Media Kit. So this would be for partners and sponsors. Just really giving them essentially a universal event graphic with the save the date, and you'll send that to your partners and sponsors that they can then post on their own social media sites, websites to really help generate interest and engagement. Alternatively too, you can just ask them to follow you on social, ask them to share the link for registration. And the aim here is really just to increase reach and impressions, which is marketing terminology for essentially the number of times an advertisement or piece of content is viewed by potential customers or audience members. All right, now let's dive into the execution stage, the day of the event. So check in, you want to make sure you have a good check-in platform that can be digital or analog. If you just want to use paper, just want to at least have some method of tracking who attended and who didn't. That way, when you send follow-ups later, you'll know what will be relevant to each person, and you can really tailor the language of your follow-up. Live social media, if you're doing that, if you want to do some live streaming of your events, you don't necessarily have to buy equipment. You can just use phone apps. Most people have smartphones, so you can download some different apps that help with live streaming. And I will flag here, usually live streaming eats up a lot of data, so you'll want to make sure whatever venue you're at has Wi-Fi, and make sure that you turn that on and turn off data. Alternatively, if you don't want to do live streaming, you can just share images or quotes from presentations throughout the event. Hashtags, you want to make sure that you have a specific dedicated hashtag for the event. So every time you share it and encourage others to share, you use that hashtag that way you'll be able to really analyze it later, how much that was picked up, how many people reposted it. And speaker handles as well. If you have anyone, any speakers or any key volunteers that you want to mention or thank, you want to make sure that you tag them on social if you're thanking them via social so that they see the recognition. as well as encourage them to share that to get extra exposure. All right. And our last stage here is evaluation. So this is where the analytics and numbers are going to come in handy. So events, as I mentioned, can really be the start of a lifelong relationship with a donor. You want to make sure that you're cultivating and stewarding your attendees to really create that lifelong relationship. So feedback, you want to send a request for feedback really as soon as possible after the event. So for instance, sending it with the thank you or the recap of the event. Again, you want to send it as soon as possible when it's still really fresh in people's minds. If too much time's passed, you're not going to see as much engagement or as, as good feedback as you might want to see. So you can use tools like SurveyMonkey, one of the most common ones, Google Forms as well, as I mentioned, one of our clients uses, which work great. You can just send that as a link in your follow-up or a thank you email. Yeah, some websites also allow for surveys. So you can just integrate it directly onto your website. Analytics, this will tell you how number of clicks, how many people signed up, where they may have stalled out in the registration process, if that's an issue. So it could be an indication that your registration form is too long, for instance. Just gives you really good data to understand and utilize moving forward. Some platforms here are HubSpot and Everwall. Continual improvement. So the point of all this tracking, data gathering is really to improve the event. So you want to make sure that you're using the data in a really meaningful way and look at what's effective and what to try out for future events. So again, making sense of data, learning points, and strategically making changes for future events. All right. So thank you everyone so much for listening. That wraps up the core of the presentation. So I really want to open it up to everyone. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand. We can call on each of you, whatever method you prefer. All right. Might not have too many questions, but yeah. Another minute. Okay. Well, Lindsay, I'll pass it back to you to round everything off.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Chelsea. This is fantastic. And thank you all for joining us. We will get this posted online shortly, and I'll send out that link to everyone who registered. And then we hope to see you all for the next session on Tuesday, July 11th at 4. That'll be on foundation outreach and grant writing and corporate giving. Have a wonderful evening.